Well, tonight we're going to launch into our study of the Old Testament book of Daniel. This book combines some of the most familiar and best-loved stories in the Bible, along with near-term and long-term prophecies that can be confusing. We see in this book an overview of God's redemptive plan, and it reminds us of the words of Jesus in John 5:39, where he said, "You search the scriptures because you think that in them you have eternal life, and it is they that bear witness about me." And so we're going to certainly see the bearing witness of Christ as we go through our study. We continue to search the scriptures to learn more about Jesus. Well, we'll begin tonight with an overview of the book of Daniel. We'll look at the theme, the content, the author, and the timing of the book. And to better understand Daniel, we also need some history. And so we're going to take a look at the history that led up to Daniel's time and some of the history after Daniel's time. So this overview and this background are essential to help us understand the context in which Daniel was written. So we'll have a number of maps and timelines tonight. So first of all, let's begin with the theme of Daniel. The book of Daniel speaks of God's sovereignty. Yes, we see the exciting stories, faithful men of great character, and incredible prophecies of things to come. But the overriding theme of the book is God's sovereignty. Man makes plans, but God determines the outcome. We will see this and will emphasize it every week of our study, including tonight. God is sovereign over creation, over kings, and over history. Nothing can thwart his purposes. He's sovereign over burning fire and bloodthirsty lions. He's sovereign over heathen kings and their counselors. In fact, he calls them his servants. He can humble them and raise them up again. He's sovereign over all events and when they occur. The God of the universe did not just set the world in motion and then step back to see what would happen. He's actively involved in the lives of those he created. Well, Daniel has two distinct parts. The first 6 chapters tell some of the outstanding events that happened to Daniel and his friends during their time in Babylon and the early days of the Persian Empire. These Jewish teenagers were taken from their homes in Jerusalem and led to Babylon to be put into the king's service. The first section includes the beloved stories of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the fiery furnace, Daniel in the lion's den, and the handwriting on the wall. The last 6 chapters are prophetic writings. They include events that were future to Daniel's time, but history to us. And they also include events that are future even to us, like the Great Tribulation that is coming. So, who wrote Daniel? Well, the author of Daniel is clearly Daniel. He writes frequently in the first person. There have been some skeptics who challenge this, but really their objections aren't so much based upon the person of Daniel as the author, but rather the timing of when the book was written. They think the book must have been written long after Daniel lived. So the near-term prophecies in Daniel are so detailed and so accurate, the skeptics say it couldn't have been written during Daniel's time. It must have been somebody who wrote later than that and looked back on it because they're so accurate. It's not prophecy, it's history to them. The real problem here with these so-called scholars is that they deny the omniscience and the power and even the existence of God. So when was this book written? Well, since it was written by Daniel, the best estimate that we have is that Daniel wrote this book in the later years of his life, as he was looking back on what had occurred. It's estimated that Daniel was born around 620 to 623 BC, something like that. And we base that upon him being a teenager when he was led off into captivity in Babylon in 605 BC. He was still alive when Cyrus ascended the throne of Persia and issued the decree to restore and rebuild Jerusalem in 538. So Daniel is in his 80s, maybe approaching 90 at that point. So the book is probably written somewhere in the 535 to 540 BC time frame to get kind of an approximation on that. Daniel lived during the period that we refer to as the Babylonian captivity. This represented God's judgment on his disobedient children, Israel. God used the empire of Babylon to conquer Judah and lead them away from their land as captives. So let's review what led up to the conquest of Judah. As God was leading his people out of Egypt at the time of the first Passover and the Exodus from Egypt and into the Promised Land, he warned them to obey his laws and not to go after other gods. Well, then David became the king. His son Solomon later ascended to the throne. But after Solomon, the kingdom was divided in two. The northern kingdom was called Israel, and the southern kingdom was called Judah. Judah was made up of the tribes of Judah and Benjamin, and then the other tribes were a part of Israel. So God sent prophets to warn both nations not to worship other gods and to obey his laws. And we have this, somebody has 2 Kings 17, 13, and 14.
Let's see. Yet the Lord named Israel and Judah by every prophet and every seer, saying, turn from your evil ways and keep my commandments and my statutes in accordance with all the law that I commanded your fathers, and that I sent to you by my servants the prophets. But they would not listen, but they were stubborn as their fathers had been, who did not believe in the Lord their God.
God sent prophets, gave them warnings, told them to obey his law, not to sacrifice to foreign idols. But the people were disobedient throughout the times of the kings of both Israel and Judah. They adopted the idols and the sins of the surrounding nations. And instead of being a light to the nations as God had intended, they turned their back on God and went after false gods. They set up idols and worshiped them. They practiced divination. In time, they even became so debauched that they were burning their own sons and daughters as offerings to these other gods. All the kings of Israel were wicked. As a result, they were conquered by the Assyrians in 722 BC. Israel was scattered throughout the Assyrian kingdom. Somebody has that 2 Kings 17, 6 through 8.
In the 9th year of Hoshea, the king of Assyria captured Samaria, and he carried the Israelites away to Assyria and placed them in Hala and on the Harbor, the river of Ozan, and in the cities of the Negev. And this occurred because the people of Israel had sinned against the Lord their God, who had brought them up out of the land of Egypt, from under the hand of Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and had feared other gods, and walked in the customs of the nations whom the Lord drove out before the people of Israel, and in the customs that the kings of Israel had practiced.
Okay, so that conquering of Israel, the northern kingdom, by the Assyrians happened in 722 BC. We'll have some timelines here in a few minutes. So Israel was scattered throughout the Assyrian kingdom. Well, then we have the southern kingdom. Now, Judah had mostly bad kings, but there were a few kings who did bring about a revival, and the people turned to God for brief periods of time. But by the time we get to the end of this period, the last kings of Judah were progressively worse than the king before. 2 Kings lists these last kings of Judah, and for each one we see this phrase repeated. And he did what was evil in the sight of the Lord according to all that his father had done. And that just becomes a refrain that gets repeated after every king. So the last 4 or 5 kings were just despicable in their behavior, even though there had been a few good ones before that to bring about revival. King Jehoahaz reigned for only 3 months when the king of Egypt deposed him and carried him to Egypt. His brother Eliakim was made king in his place, and his name was changed to Jehoiakim. During Jehoiakim's reign, in 605, Nebuchadnezzar made his first raid against Jerusalem. At that point, Nabopolassar was the king of Babylon, and Nebuchadnezzar was his son, the crown prince, and he was his best general. Somebody has 2 Kings 24, 1 through 3. We'll see what happened there.
During Jehoiakim's reign, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, invaded the land. Jehoiakim became his vassal for 3 years. But then he changed his mind and rebelled against Nebuchadnezzar. The Lord sent Babylonian, Aramean, Moabite, and Ammonite raiders against him. He sent them to destroy Judah in accordance with the word of the Lord, proclaimed by his servants, the prophets. Surely these things happened to Judah according to the Lord's command, in order to remove them from his presence, because of the sins of Manasseh and all he had done, including the shedding of innocent blood.
So this tells us what happened, but the key here is that God brought this about. God sent Nebuchadnezzar there. God made him victorious, and it was to bring judgment upon the people of Judah. So Nebuchadnezzar carried away the king, and he took some of the vessels out of the temple, some of the gold and silver, and he took that away to Babylon. And at the same time, Daniel and his friends were also removed to Babylon, 605 BC. Well, then Jehoiachin becomes the king, and 3 months later, Nebuchadnezzar made his second attack on Jerusalem and carried away some more of the Jews to Babylon, and this takes place in 597 BC. And we think this second deportation included Ezekiel, the prophet Ezekiel went at that time. Well, then we get down to the last king of Judah. His name was Zedekiah. He became king, and he led a bit of a revolt against Babylon. They were at that point a vassal state of Babylon, and Babylon wanted them to pay some taxes and so forth, and Zedekiah decided, we're not going to do that. So he tried to stand up to them. And we can read about that in 2 Kings 24, verses 20 and 21. Yeah, if somebody could pick that up.
For because of the anger of the Lord, it came to the point in Jerusalem and Judah that he cast them out from his presence. And Zedekiah rebelled against the king of Babylon.
So God sent Jeremiah with the message to Zedekiah, and Jeremiah wrote this message in Jeremiah, well, I hope he gave you the right number there, 22, 1 through 7.
That's Jeremiah.
I think you mean 27?
I think I mean 20, Jeremiah 20, that should be Jeremiah 27, 1 through 7, sorry.
In the beginning of the reign of Zedekiah, the son of Josiah, king of Judah, this word came to Jeremiah from the Lord. Thus the Lord said to me, make yourself straps and yoke bars, and put them on your neck. Send word to the king of Edom, the king of Moab, the king of the sons of Ammon, the king of Tyre, and the king of Sidon, by the hand of the envoys that have come to Jerusalem to Zedekiah, king of Judah. Give them this charge for their masters. Thus says the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, this is what you shall say to your masters. It is I who, by my great power and my outstretched arm, have made the earth, with the men and animals that are on the earth, and I give it to whoever it seems right to me. Now I have given all these lands into the hand of Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, my servant. I have given him also the beasts of the field to serve him. All the nations shall serve him and his sons and his grandson until the time of his own land comes. Then many nations and the great kings shall make him their slave.
So we notice a couple things here. God told all of the kings of all these nations that they were to submit to Nebuchadnezzar, and that included Zedekiah. And again, he calls him his servant. Nebuchadnezzar is God's servant, even though Nebuchadnezzar doesn't know it. But we see that Zedekiah resisted. He did not follow Jeremiah's instruction or the prophecy that Jeremiah delivered from the Lord. So he resisted. So as a result, Nebuchadnezzar brought his whole army and attacked Jerusalem for a third time in 586 BC. He laid siege to the city. The siege went on for about 6 months. The city experienced great famine. And then Zedekiah was able to briefly escape, but he was soon captured. The last thing that King Zedekiah saw was his sons being slaughtered before his eyes. And then Nebuchadnezzar had Zedekiah's eyes put out. He was then taken to Babylon. And the remaining gold, silver, and bronze vessels out of the house of the Lord were taken from the temple to Babylon, and the city of Jerusalem was destroyed and burned at that time. So here's a little timeline of what we just went through. Josiah was a good king, and he brought about some reforms, but then after him, things went downhill rapidly. Jehoahaz was briefly king, and then Jehoiakim, and that's when Nebuchadnezzar's first attack came in 605 BC. And with that first attack, Daniel and his 3 friends were taken away. After Jehoiakim was king, then Jehoiachin became king, and it was right at that time that Nebuchadnezzar came with his second attack in 597 BC, and that's when we think Ezekiel was taken. And then after that, Zedekiah ascended to the throne, and you can see he was king there for about 10 years. And then finally, Nebuchadnezzar attacked Jerusalem in 586 BC, and then he took the rest of the gold, he burned the city, and took Zedekiah along with him. Okay, so that's kind of the rough timeline where we are. Okay? Well, that certainly talks about the people, the disobedience of the people, and we saw the terrible things they did, and we saw that they had not obeyed the commands that God had given them, so God is going to punish them. There's one other prophecy that we want to take a look at. There's a prophecy and a promise that God gives. It pertains to this study, and it has to do with the Sabbath year. So let's look together at Leviticus 25. And we're going to take a look at verses 1 through 7. Did I hand that one out or no? I did. Okay, thanks.
No.
Yeah, thanks.
While Moses was on Mount Sinai, the Lord said to him, "Give these instructions to the Israelites. When you have entered the land I have given you as an inheritance, the land itself must observe a Sabbath to the Lord every 7th year. For 6 years you may plant your fields, prune your vineyards, and harvest your crops. But during the 7th year, the land will enjoy a Sabbath year of rest to the Lord. Do not plant your crops or prune your vineyards during that entire year. And don't store away the crops that grow naturally or process the grapes that grow on your unpruned vines. The land is to have a year of total rest. But you, your male and female slaves, your hired servants, and any foreigners who live with you may eat the produce that grows naturally during the Sabbath year. And your livestock and wild animals will also be allowed to eat of the land's bounty."
So just as God established a Sabbath day in the week, the 7th day on which there was to be no work, he also established a Sabbath year every 7th year, and it was the same idea. There was to be no work, no tilling of the ground that year. The ground was to rest. And he was going to provide for them by the food that naturally grew in the ground, from the ground that year. So So it's a bit of a reminder of what happened with the manna. If you remember God providing the manna, they gathered the manna for 6 days. And on the 6th day, they gathered extra manna so that on the Sabbath, they didn't have to gather it, but they had plenty to eat. So God provided for them in that way. Similar concept here with the Sabbath here. Well, let's take a look, jump ahead to chapter 26, and we'll go through some follow-up to this in chapter 26. And somebody has verses 3 through 13 of Leviticus 26.
If you walk in my statutes and observe my commandments and do them, then I will give you your rains in their season, and the land shall yield its increase, and the trees of the field shall yield their fruit. Your threshing shall last to the time of the grape harvest, and the grape harvest shall last to the time for sowing. And you shall eat your bread to the full, and dwell in your land securely. I will give peace in the land, and you shall lie down, and none shall make you afraid. And I will remove harmful beasts from the land, and the sword shall not go through your land. You shall chase your enemies, and they shall fall before you by the sword. 5 of you shall chase 100, and 100 of you shall chase 10,000. And your enemies shall fall before you by the sword. I will turn to you and make you fruitful and multiply you, and will confirm my covenant with you. You shall eat old store, long kept, and you shall clear out the old to make way for the new. I will make my dwelling among you, and my soul shall not abhor you. And I will walk among you and be your God, and you shall be my people. I am Yahweh, your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, that you should not be their slaves. And I have broken the bars of your yoke and made you walk erect.
So here we see God give them a promise. If they will obey him and obey his laws, if they will not make idols and make these foreign gods, if they will keep the Sabbaths and reverence him, then he's going to bless them in all these ways. Bless them with food. He's going to bless them with safety. He's going to give them victory in battle. So all these great things are happening. But then we see things turn in verse 14. So we're going to continue on here. It's an extended passage, but we're going to break it up into chunks. So in verse 14, we read about the punishment that God is going to bring about them if they disobey. And it's in a series. It's a progressive list. So we'll read the chunks of how this progresses if they don't obey. So first he says in verses 14 to 17, who has a...
But if you will not listen to me and will not do all these commandments, I will spurn, if you spurn my statutes, and if your soul abhors my rules, so that you will not do my commandments, but break my covenant, then I will do this to you. I will visit you with panic, with wasting disease and fever that consume the eyes and make the heart ache. And you shall sow your seed in vain, and your enemies shall eat it. I will set my face against you, and you shall be struck down before your enemies. Those who hate you shall rule over you, and you shall flee from none pursues you, when none pursue you.
So if they're disobedient, they're going to have these sicknesses and these disease. They're not going to have good crops, and they're going to have some problems. But then it goes on from there. Let's go on to verses 18 to 20.
And if, in spite of this, you will not listen to me, then I will discipline you again sevenfold for your sins, and I will break the pride of your power, and I will make your heavens like iron and your earth like bronze. And your strength shall be spent in vain, for your land shall not yield its increase, and the trees of your land shall not yield their fruit.
So if you didn't get it the first time, we're going to make it 7 times worse, God says. And God says your strength will be spent, and you're going to be working for vain. Well, then the next progression is verses 20 1 and 22.
If even then you remain hostile toward me and refuse to obey me, I will inflict disaster on you 7 times over for your sins. I will send wild animals that will rob you of your children and destroy your livestock. Your numbers will be dwindled and your roads will be deserted.
So if you still don't get it, we're gonna ramp it up and we're gonna increase the punishment some more, and there are gonna be these wild beasts sent against you. Then verses 23 to 26.
And if you fail to learn the lesson and continue your hostility toward me, then I myself will be hostile toward you. I will personally strike you with calamities 7 times over for your sins. I will send armies against you to carry out the curse of the covenant you have broken. And when you run to your towns for safety, I will send a plague to destroy you there, and you will be handed over to your enemies. I will destroy your food supply so that 10 women will need food supply so that 10 women will need only 1 oven to break bread for their families. They will ration your food by weight, and though you have food to eat, you will not be satisfied.
So it gets ramped up even more. If you're still not listening, if you still haven't gotten the message of this punishment God's getting, it's going to get worse. Well, then we come to God's final warning. And this is in verses 27 to 33.
But if in spite of this you will not listen to me, but walk contrary to me, then I will walk contrary to you in fury. And I myself will discipline you sevenfold for your sins. You shall eat the flesh of your sons, and you shall eat the flesh of your daughters. And I will destroy your high places, and come down your incense altars, and cast your dead bodies upon the dead bodies of your idols. And my soul will abhor you. And I will lay your cities waste, and I will make your sanctuaries desolate, and I will not smell your pleasing aromas. And I myself will devastate the land, so that your enemies who settle in it shall be appalled at it. And I will scatter you among the nations, and I will unsheath the sword after you. And your land shall be a desolation, and your cities shall be a waste.
So if you still don't get it, here's the final step. This falling into this, sacrificing your children, their high places will be destroyed, and the enemy's going to come in and take them over and scatter them throughout the nations. So this is not only a warning, but this is kind of a summarized history of Israel right here, because they did all these things. That's actually the path that they chose. But then look at the result of all this. Verses 34 and 35.
Then the land shall enjoy its Sabbath as long as it lies desolate, while you are in the rainless land. Then the land shall rest and enjoy its Sabbath. As long as it lies desolate, it shall have rest, the rest that it did not have on your Sabbaths, when you were dwelling in it.
You think you're outsmarting me by going ahead and not observing the Sabbath year? You're going to get that extra land? No, the land is going to have its Sabbaths, one way or another. Either you're going to obey me and observe it, or else I'm going to bring about your destruction and scatter you to the enemy, and while you're gone, then the land will enjoy its Sabbaths. 2 Chronicles 36, 20, and 21 makes clear that's exactly what's happening. Somebody has that.
And Azariah, the chief priest, and all the priests looked at him, and behold, he was leprous in his forehead, and they rushed him out quickly, and he himself hurried to go out because the Lord had struck him. And King Uzziah was a leper to the day of his death, and being a leper lived in a separate house, and for he was excluded from the house of the Lord. Jotham, his son, was over the king's household, governing the people of the land.
I think I gave you the wrong one. That doesn't sound right.
I think, did you read 2 Chronicles 36? 20 to 21?
I did. Yeah, 26,
36?
Oh, it says 2600.
Yep.
Is that a different one?
It should be 36,
Okay, that's.
20 to 21.
Alright, so okay, let's just type on the. He took into exile he took into exile in Babylon those who had escaped from the sword, and they became servants to him and to his son until the establishment of the kingdom of Persia fulfilled the word of the Lord and the mouth of Jeremiah until the land had enjoyed its Sabbath. All the days that it lay desolate, it kept Sabbath and fulfilled them.
So God makes it clear here that the number of years they're in exile isn't just some arbitrary number drawn out of the air. It's tied to the Sabbath years that were neglected. For 490 years, they did not observe the Sabbath year. So there were 70 Sabbath years during that period of time. And the Babylonian captivity, or that exile in Babylon, would last 70 years. And during that time, the land would enjoy its Sabbaths. Well, there are some different ideas about how we calculate the 70 years. And what dates we tie this to. So let's take a look at a couple of ideas. The first idea is that the 70 years of the Babylonian exile covers the time when Babylon was predominant in Judah and the surrounding nations. So that begins about 609 and goes to 539, which is just the time when the Persians come in and conquer Babylon, and Cyrus issues his decree. So that's one thought. Another thought is, well, the 70 years can begin at 605 when Daniel and his friends are taken away in captivity. And then it ends in 536, again, about the time that the Persians come in and Cyrus issues his decree. Cyrus issues his decree in 538, so it takes him a while to get packed up, and it's a long journey back. So by 536, then we get our 70 years that way. Or the one that makes the most sense to me, I mean, you can make an argument for any of these, but the one that makes the most sense to me is marking from the destruction of the temple in 586 to when it was rebuilt in 516 or 515. So you can take your pick as how you want to calculate that. I kind of prefer the last one, but that's okay. The point is that they were gone for 70 years, and it was that time period was set because of the Sabbath years that they had neglected to observe before that. Okay. Well, now let's consider some of what's happening in the world around with the various empires that are out there during this period. At that time, the greatest empire is the Assyrian Empire. And you can see the darker green area. That was what the Assyrian Empire looked like in 824 BC. But as they continued to expand and grow and conquer other nations, the lighter green area is what their empire encompassed by 671 BC. So they really grew their empire, and you'll notice there's little Judah right down there, still on its own, completely encircled by Assyria, so they still are on their own. But a lot of these other places have been made vassal states of Assyria, so they have to pay duty and custom to the king. So Egypt is like that. The Babylonians are like that. The Persians are like that. So they're all kind of under the thumb of Assyria, if you will. Well, by the latter part of the 6th century BC, the Assyrians are in decline. The Babylonian king is a guy named Nabopolassar. He destroys the Assyrian capital of Nineveh in 612 BC. Several years later, his son Nebuchadnezzar would strike the final blow to the Assyrians, and most of the book of Nahum is devoted to prophesying the destruction of Nineveh. The downfall of this great city was also prophesied in Zephaniah. Somebody has Zephaniah 2, 13 to 15.
And the Lord will strike the lands of the north with his fist. He will destroy Assyria and make its great capital, Nineveh, a desolate wasteland, parched like a desert. The city that once was so proud will become a pasture for sheep and cattle. All sorts of wild animals will settle there, Owls of many kinds will live among the ruins of its palaces, hooting from the gaping windows. Rubble will block all the doorways, and the cedar paneling will lie open to the wind and weather. This is the fate of that boisterous city, once so secure. In all the world there is no city as great as I, it boasted. But now, look how it has become an utter ruin, a place where animals live. Everyone passing that way will laugh in derision or shake a defiant fist.
So God prophesied through the prophet Zephaniah that Nineveh would be destroyed. Indeed, Nabopolassar brought that about, and that was pretty much the end of Assyria, but there's still one final death blow to be struck. Well, during this time, Egypt is also a vassal state, but they're kind of wanting to have a little independence too. The Medes and Persians are up in the north, and they're wanting to lash out against Assyria. And then Babylon was kind of growing at this time too, as we get close to the year 600. We see to the west there are the Greek states. They're individual city-states yet. They really haven't come together as a nation, as a consolidated kingdom. It's happening, but it's not yet their time. And then farther west, the city of Rome has been established, and it's growing. But again, it's just one of a number of cities that are there on the Italian peninsula, so their time is farther ahead yet. Well, then as we get closer to 600 BC, the map changes dramatically. So now the Babylonian king, Nabopolassar, is reigning over this green arch there, the dark green. That's the Babylonian kingdom. But Nabopolassar did a clever thing. He saw the Medes that were up above him in that yellow area, the Medes and the Persians, and they're a growing and mighty empire as well. So Nabopolassar made an arrangement for his son Nebuchadnezzar to marry the daughter of the Mede king. When she married him, then she's going to go live in Babylon. So that means the Medes aren't going to be attacking Babylon anytime soon, because the king's daughter is there as Nebuchadnezzar's wife. So the Assyrians are declining. They're seeking some help from the Egyptians to come on up. And the Assyrian-Egyptian alliance is met by the Babylonians, who are supported by the Medes, at the Battle of Carchemish in 605 BC. And if I expand this a little bit here, you can see right there in the top of the green area there is Carchemish. This is one of the great battles of the ancient world. In this battle, the general at that time, Nebuchadnezzar, defeats the Assyrian army. And this really marks the end of the Assyrian Empire and the establishment of Babylon as the strongest empire in the world this time. Egypt also has to turn and run and go back to their home country, so their influence in the area now dramatically changes as they go back. But Babylon's only an empire for a short time. God used these idol worshipers to accomplish his purposes, but that doesn't mean that he ignored their sin. By 539 BC, they were conquered by the Medo-Persians. So God is using the greed and war lusts of these heathen kings to accomplish his will. They'll make alliances to their benefit, but it's God who is in God's plan. They rise up against each other, but it's God who controls history. Other nations will be great in their time, but that's also in God's hands. So as the book of Daniel opens, Nebuchadnezzar brought an end to the Assyrian Empire by defeating them at Carchemish. He sent the Egyptians retreating. The Babylonian Empire is now the dominant force, and Nebuchadnezzar turns his attention to these troublemakers down in Judah who don't want to cooperate. So after successfully laying siege to Jerusalem, Nebuchadnezzar takes some of the gold and silver and vessels from the temple and leads many prominent Jews to Babylon. The journey from Jerusalem to Babylon was about 900 miles. If they could go straight across, it'd only be 500, but that's through the desert, and they're not going to do that, so they have to go around. It took about 4 months to complete this journey. And this is what's described at the beginning of Daniel. So I'm going to read the first couple of verses of Daniel, and we'll be getting into this next week, but Daniel begins in this way. In the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and besieged it. And the Lord gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand with some of the vessels of the house of God. And he brought them into the land of Shinar to the house of his God and placed the vessels in the treasury of his God. So that's where Daniel begins as he and his friends are brought into Jerusalem. Well, tonight we're going to do something a little different. I don't have any paintings for you, but instead of that, we're going to do a virtual tour. We're going to try to put ourselves in the place of young Daniel and his friends as he arrives in Babylon after this 4-month journey. And this is actually going to be a great lead-in to our study next week as well. There's a museum in Berlin called the Pergamon Museum that has recreated part of the gate into Jerusalem, was called into Babylon, that's called the Ishtar Gate, and some of the road that leads up to it. So we're going to try to take a look at this if we can. The museum okay. Okay, I may have to kill the PowerPoint first.
I think Gary's in there trying to help.
Well, I think it's my problem. Maybe not. What if I make this full screen? Okay. It's not picking up my internet session.
Do you have it on an extended desktop or duplicate?
I don't know.
Is it seeing it as like an extension?
It's just seeing my screens, my home screensaver there.
See if you can slide it off. Unless is it a video or yeah? Try to see if it slides to the right or the left, like the whole window.
Oh.
And grab the whole window and bring it to the right. Yeah, if you keep moving to the right, I saw it. Keep going all the way. Like it's a separate screen.
It's coming.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's treating it like an extended
Okay.
desktop. So bring it like
Okay.
like this is a separate screen all the way to the right. Like just keep.
Actually, what I want is this down here.
Yeah. So just grab that window and pull it all the way to the right. Keep going like off the screen. Yeah. So now you got to look at the screen. Oh. Do you mind if I?
Yeah, go ahead. Okay. No, there's nothing to, it's not a play, it's a, yeah.
Okay.
I'm gonna have to turn around and do this, aren't I? Okay. Okay, so this part of the museum is actually closed right now, so partly because of that, partly I think because of COVID, they created this virtual tour that we can take, and we'll do that now. So,
Is it sized rightly?
well, it's okay.
Does it seem zoomed in or something? Or?
There we go. Okay, we want to. Okay, so I'll try not to make you seasick here, but. Okay. Maybe now this will help. Okay, so. The first thing I want to look at here is this relief right here. And this is actually a king of Assyria. And his name was Esarhaddon. He lived a bit before the guys in Babylon, but I'm showing you this just to kind of give you a flavor for what life was like back then. And I think if I hit this 3D in here, okay, here we can get a better view of this. Okay. So here's the king, and this was what they call a stele or a relief that they made as he's coming back from battle. So this is probably when he conquered Egypt, and so he's portrayed as very large, and there are a couple of these miniature figures down at the bottom, and the little guys. These are kings he's just conquered. We think this is like maybe the crown prince of Egypt, and another king. So if we zoom in here, you can see the king is up there. He's got a goblet in his right hand. In his left hand, he has his scepter. And if you look closely, you can see these two lines coming down from his scepter. They're like these two leather thongs that come down from his scepter. And if you'll watch those thongs, they come down, and each of these kings or crown princes down here, very small. King is very large. If you haven't already gotten the idea who's in charge here, those guys have a ring through their lower lip. Their lips have been pierced with a ring, and those leather thongs are tied on to that ring. So if the king moves his scepter to the right, they're going to the right. If he flicks his wrist to the left, they're going to the left. Okay? So we clearly see who's in charge here. Now, this is the kind of thing that would happen as they come back in parade after victory. And if you'll remember, Yuri mentioned a couple of weeks ago when we were talking about Jesus coming in to Jerusalem, we call it the triumphal entry. But by the standards of the day, it didn't look like much. Yes, there were people laying their coats and the palm branches down, and yes, they were shouting hallelujah, but here comes one man on a donkey. They're used to these grand shows where a king comes marching in on his horse, and he's got trumpets and all kinds of fanfare going on. There are people carrying in the gold and silver they've captured. They've got some of the people they've captured marching behind them. And quite often, they've got the rulers of that country in tow, just like this. So that's the kind of grand entrance these people are making. We don't have a record that that's what happened to Daniel, but this is the kind of thing these guys did. Okay. Let's try to go back here. Okay, so as we come back, now we can, wrong way. Oh, that's not the right way. Okay. I'm twisted around here. There we go. So we're going to go into this next room here. And in this room, we see this wall. And you can see how tall it is. And just for a little bit of perspective here, the back of the lion is about 6 feet. Okay, so that's how tall it is. These are the walls that are on the processional way that leads to the Ishtar Gate, which is the gate into Babylon. Ishtar was their main goddess. And so you have this glazed tile. The goddess's symbol was a lion. But you've got this glazed tile, so this actual walkway is about 3 times as wide as what you see here. And it went on for 200 yards. It's 2 football fields long. So imagine teenage Daniel and his teenage friends who've just been on the march for 4 months from Jerusalem, And they're coming into this foreign land, and they're about to get to the city, which could be their new home, and this is what they see. And so they march through this. For 200 yards, they're marching down this.
Steve, in real life, are those lions heading out of the city or into the?
They're pointing out. Yeah. And then you can see up ahead of you what you're coming up on. We're coming up on the gate. And then as you enter this room, there's the gate to Babylon. You have all this, again, this ornate glazed tile. Over here is some of what was on the, let's see, what was that? That was the, oh, over here is an inscription that was on the side of the wall. And you can see the cuneiform characters that are there. And it basically says something like, I'm the great Nebuchadnezzar, and look at this beautiful city I built, and it's wonderful, and I did this, and I did that, and I did the other thing. I'm a great guy.
I think it's hard to tell. Because that gate is huge. That gate is just so tall.
Yeah.
It's just incredible.
Yeah, again, the back of these animals are about 6 feet, so you can just see how tall that is. And then this, here's a top view, I think. Well, here's a side view. They built a model there. There's a side view of the wall. And then I think there's a. There you go. You're at one end. There's the view leading in. And this wall right here, this was a replica of what's in the throne room, the king's throne room. So just inside the wall, just inside, you come down the processional way there, and just inside the wall was the king's palace, was just inside the wall. And that walkway, that street had a name, and the name of the street was "May the Enemy Not Prevail Avenue." Okay. So let's see. Did I see that one already? Yeah. Okay. There was one other view I wanted to show you, and that may be on the other side. Well, okay.
Is that the model, that last thing, Stuart?
Yeah. Well, they get a little bit of a side view of it. Okay. So anyway, the point here is, I mean, this is meant to impress his friends and intimidate his enemies, and you can see how it would certainly do that. And so this is the first sight that Daniel and his friends see as they approach Babylon. So that's next week when they actually do that. We'll get into that, but I wanted to at least take you on that little tour to give you a little bit of a flavor for what it must have been like for them approaching the city. Okay, well, we're over time, so let me just close by asking if there are any comments or observations from what we've talked about tonight.
A lot of things to remember, I can't store them all in my mind.
Yeah.
But these are historical data that I guess, essential to how the book of Daniel came up.
Yeah, the point isn't to memorize the dates necessary. I mean, there are some things that are important, but that's not the real point. The real point is to see how God's worked through history and how God's in control of the timing of all of these things and the movement of people, and he's going to use them for his purposes. In this case, his purpose is to discipline his people and to punish them for their disobedience.
I was reading the chapter 1 of the book of Daniel, and I'm impressed by the sagacity of Daniel, having a really acute mental discernment to be able to do what is right before the
Yeah,
eyes of the Lord.
yeah.
It's laudable what a teenager having that sagacity
Right.
is
Yeah.
unusual, especially in this generation.
Yeah. Yeah. And coming out of how depraved that kingdom had become, for him to have that kind of character is really something. Okay, well, let me close tonight and we can wrap it up.